If we look back to when I had you doing the mental math and the memory, your CO2 was the best. Look at just before 12 minutes, 12:57. Yeah, you completely let go of your breathing. Your breathing rate went way up. Your breathing volume went way down, and you accessed your prefrontal cortex to do the things I asked you to do.
That's really cool.
Right? And as soon as you weren't doing that anymore, you started overbreathing. This is classic for a habit. Some people are chronically hypocapnic where they're there all the time. Some people are only hypocapnic during certain activities. For you, you're hypocapnic moderately at rest, but when you have to do a meaningful task that requires your prefrontal cortex, you disengage the overbreathing and you went right to normal breathing.
Maybe that's why I like to do mental stuff.
Right, because what? You feel better.
Right.
So is it really that mental stuff makes you feel better, or is it that's the only time of the day you're getting enough oxygen? So you've paired those now as when I do mental stuff, I feel good. I feel more myself than any other time. Is that true? Yes, because you can't feel all of yourself all the rest of the time.
So now we're going to dive into the capnography part of our interview. And can you explain to me what I'm holding here and how this fits into everything we've been talking about?
Sure. You are holding a precious little instrument. A capnometer measures your end tidal CO2. That's the amount of CO2 that comes out with your exhale. That amount of CO2 tells us within 1 to 2 millimeters of mercury how much CO2 is in your blood. And that is how we determine hyper or hypo or eucapnia, which is normal. So when you put the machine on, we'll be able to see your breath in real time and measure your capnic levels from breath to breath. We'll also be able to see your breathing behaviors. If you're taking big breaths, small breaths, fast breaths, slow breaths, if you stop, we'll be able to see all of that.
So I'm about to be exposed, basically.
Yes. How vulnerable do you feel?
Well, trust me, my audience knows very much that like I'm very much a patient like they are, and I got into all this through my own breathing troubles, and so I'm by no means any kind of model of perfection when it comes to health or breathing. Mm-hmm. But let's find out. So should I go ahead and put this on and turn it on, and then we'll do a screen share to the software
Absolutely.
That's paired with this? Let's
do it. Okay. And to be fair, the first time I put this on, I was chronically hypocapnic. So no matter what we see on your screen today, I've seen worse.
Thank you for that. I definitely need that. I need that disclaimer. So appreciate that. So could you coach me on putting this on?
Sure. Putting on the nasal cannula, there's a little half moon shape that goes down towards the lip. And then the prongs go into your nose. And then you pull it back and just over the ears like you're putting on a mask or a set of glasses. There's a toggle underneath to make it comfortable. Perfect. If it's too tight, you can loosen it. There you go.
It's nice and snug.
Perfect. That looks good. How's it feel?
Feels snug. Yeah. Feels like they're definitely in there and doing what they need to be doing. Okay. And this is connected to this. So it's one contiguous piece. Presumably the breath data is going to go through this tube into this unit. And this unit, which is pretty expensive, actually. There's a lot happening here. This is not some cheap electronic thing that you get at Walmart. This is a pretty sophisticated device that what's happening inside of this, or maybe you can explain that as we go and look at the data.
Sure, I can. I think just before we look at the data, what we can say about it is that the technology inside of it, and this is where the priciness comes from, beyond our really amazing software to work with it, is that it has to be able to calibrate where you are at sea level to get the air, to get the CO2 levels for your room air. So it's really important. It's delicate in that way, and that's why it's so precise.
Wouldn't want to drop this thing.
Actually, it's built really sturdy. So if you drop it, you're good.
Okay.
I've worked with it with athletes in sport. Hockey players wear it on the ice.
Wow.
I've had kids wearing them on trampolines and the unit went flying and it survived, right? Mm-hmm. So they're sturdy, but their guts are really delicate.
And what's this called, and what's the company that makes this?
This is a CapnoTrainer Go, and it's made by Better Physiology.
And are you associated with that company?
I have been associated with them as a distributor now in Canada.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So shall I turn it on, or should we go into the screen share first?
Go ahead and turn it on, and then we'll screen share.
On button here?
Yes.
One press?
One press. And we've already calibrated it, so your viewers won't see that. But now let's look at the software.
Okay, so we have 4 green lights. That means we're in business.
You are.
Okay.
And it makes a little tiny humming sound. It's pretty quiet.
Yeah, here.
Yeah, our old ones kind of sounded like a blender. So this is really awesome. The old ones had a really noisy motor.
Sounds like a purring kitten.
Yeah.
Okay, so screen share. All right, here we are. So now we have the desktop-based software loaded up, although there's also a mobile software that can be paired with this. And this is paired with my Mac via a Bluetooth dongle that's plugged into my computer.
Yeah.
And the pairing was very seamless, if I could say so myself.
It's really easy now, and it's nice to be able to have it on multiple platforms, because in the house, you can have it on your main computer with the dongle, and it has really great range. And then when you want to go out with it, you put it on your phone or your iPad, and it's immediately in Bluetooth mode.
Fantastic. So why don't you get me started here?
All right, I'll have you click on the connect button.
This button here?
Yes. And then the button just to the right of it is for recording. So let's record your session.
Oh, not connected yet.
There you go.
Okay, there we go.
So it's going to ask you for the serial number on the back.
Okay.
It will only do this the first time.
Is it okay if I show this number, or should I?
Yes, no, that's fine.
And there we go.
And there we go. Now, typically we would have to recalibrate the unit, but we've already done that today. So we're not having to do that with you right now.
And what did we calibrate it to? The environmental pressure, the atmospheric pressure?
Correct. We're calibrating to environmental pressure, your location according to sea level, and what is the concentration of room air carbon dioxide, so that we have an accurate measurement. And this unit actually samples your breath 100 times per second.
Wow.
So we're getting a really crisp look at what's happening in your breath and in your breathing behaviors.
Is it normal to feel a little self-conscious the first time you put one of these things on?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so if you have a breathing attachment to performance anxiety, it will show up.
That makes sense.
Yes. So when people say that to me, I'm like, yes. And if that's happening, we can work on that. So that eventually using the Capno Trainer screen is like giving yourself another sense, because you're experiencing your breath in a new way in this moment. You can see it. It's not only a sensory experience. It's not only a mechanical experience. It's a visual experience. And now you can see how your movements or lack thereof in interfering with the breath are changing your physiology in real time. And that's the beauty of this unit. And it's not that you want to have this unit forever. This is for training, to relearn how to be with natural respiration and to improve your ability to sense when you've accidentally stepped out of the normal range.
Mm-hmm. So what exactly is this curve telling us directly?
Right. So what we're looking at here, every time you see the line go up, that is the measurement of your CO2. And then there's an alveolar plateau and at the top where it goes flat, and then it goes back down when you are
exhale.
Yep. You exhale on the way up, inhale, and any breath holds will go down to the 0 line. We're not collecting CO2 at that time because there isn't any in the airway.
Right.
Right. So right now you're extending your exhale, and you're pushing by the extension of your exhale, you can see that the curve actually went higher.
Yeah. And what's the red line? Is that healthy amount of CO2?
So 35 millimeters of mercury is not in the range of normal. Normal CO2 is 37 to 43, 42, 43. Well, the red line there is to help you understand is any breath below that, the body doesn't have enough oxygen to compensate. So in the normal range, 37 to 42, your respiratory system has some flexibility. Once it drops, your body has to start to make decisions around where's the oxygen going and what's not getting any. Right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So how does my graph look so far? Is this look healthy? Does this look?
Yeah, I'm going to give you a little more information about that, but first I want to acquaint you with the rest of what you're looking at on the screen.
Please do.
The green graph at the bottom left is giving you your bar graph for every minute of CO2, so you can see your trends. Okay. The middle blue graph is showing your breathing rate, which should be variable. Good breathing is variable breathing. There is no set rate that is a good breath rate. And then the CAPNIA index is letting us know how much time your breath is spending above the line of 35. I use that to help people understand when their prefrontal cortex is being properly oxygenated. Because as I was just saying, if your CO2 goes low, the body has to make adjustments. And the adjustments go in the following order. You'll get a rise in a baseline anxiety or a hyper alertness because the body wants you to figure out why you don't have enough CO2. After that, the body starts decreasing oxygen delivery to the prefrontal cortex by 4% for every 1 millimeter of mercury that you're below 40. So by the time your breath, let's say, drops to 30 millimeters of mercury, you would be 40% hypoxic in the part of your brain responsible for executive functioning. That creates a lot of problems. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I use that pink graph for people to be able to see when they've come up. So we can see that when we started, you were just slightly below. You were a little bit hypocapnic at the beginning of the session. And since you've started playing with your breath and manipulating, you're doing big breaths, you're doing a few holds, then you're doing a few catch-up breaths, you're goofing around with the unit, right? So
you caught me.
Of course. I can see that you are having some fun going, oh, this is like a game. How can I get it to go higher? And that's actually part of the motivator of using the unit is that it's immediate outcomes. You can see what you're doing. Right. Now, what's interesting is once I pointed it out and you went back to normal breathing, you dropped back into that 32, 33 baseline where we were at the beginning. Right. So what happens if Ron doesn't interfere with his breathing? What if you try not to?
And by that, do you mean for me to be where I normally would be? Like if I wasn't looking like to just as if we were interacting like we were earlier on the podcast?
Exactly. So even while we're talking, you can see that your CO2 levels are shifting a bit. Mm-hmm. So as you're speaking, you can see those jagged bits. That's normal. Talking is acrobatic. But your CO2 levels should still be over 35 while you're speaking. If they're not, if you're at low levels of CO2 while you're speaking and you're dropping oxygen delivery to your prefrontal cortex, what's going to happen by the end of the day? You're going to be exhausted from talking. Mm-hmm. And you get into those positions where you can't remember what you wanted to say. Things start to feel groggy. You have mind fog. Right? Yeah.
Yeah, I could have a lot of fun with this thing.
Oh, yeah. So I'm going to have you turn your face away from the screen. If you trust me to just be with the screen. Sure. Now, I don't think that. Is there a way that I can take over the screen while you're not looking at it?
No.
Okay, that's all right. We'll do it the way it is. When I work with people on Zoom, I can actually assume control of the screen, and then I'm working all the toggles, and they're just working on their breath. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'll have you turn away.
Like this?
Yes.
Perfect. So that I'm not seeing the screen?
Just so you're not seeing the screen, even from your peripheral. Great. And for the next 30 seconds or so, I'd like you to try to move backwards in your mind from just before I joined the call this morning to the moment you woke up. So do a little memory in reverse. and go through the memory of the day thus far to when you opened your eyes. And give me a thumbs up when you've completed that task. Okay, great. Now I'm going to have you do a little bit of math for me. We're going to start at the number 218, and you're going to count backwards by sevens in your head. Go. And what number are you at?
51.
Great, we'll stop there. Next, I'll have you do a little bit of physical activity. If you could please do some marching in place, high knees, pretty rigorous. Great. And just watch what the breathing does. This is just a normal, we want to get the data on what does your breathing think about these different activities? What are its responses? And while we're testing, it's important to understand that it can be mouth breathing or nasal breathing, and we're still going to get a good reading because these are designed, the prongs are designed in such a way that it's still picking up the CO2 at the back of your sinuses when you're mouth breathing. I should ask your viewers, how long should we make Ron go? Okay, and now stop. And notice what the breath is doing. You can feel like the breath is still a little bigger. There's a little forcefulness on the exhale. And we can see that on the graph by a dramatic triangle going up to the right. I call those the shark fins. You'll see them when I bring you back. You let me know when you feel like your breathing is starting to recover into what feels normal for you.
Yeah, it's okay.
Right. And it is. You're back to where you were just before we started that. Now, the last challenge for you today is to take big breaths. I would like you to take a slow but full breath, no pauses. It's the kind of breath that we call I call it the breath of surrender. In a moment when you've had enough and you just need a minute and you just take a big breath. Yeah. Now keep doing that. Big breath in, big breath out, and add a little force to it. You're just trying to get a little distance from the moment. Yeah, we can hear you breathing. That's great. That's usually what goes with it. Keep going. And now move the same amount of air a little faster. Now it's more like the big breaths you take when you're running up the stairs. And you might start to feel some changes physiologically as we continue this. If you do, go ahead and say it and then come back to the breath.
I feel good.
Okay, keep going.
It's really going in deep.
Mm-hmm.
It feels really good. I don't know why I don't do this sort of thing more often. It's really getting into the bottom of my lungs.
So you can feel the bottom of your lungs more right now?
Yeah, it's like hitting the spot, like when you want that big satisfying breath. Sometimes you can't get it, but I'm definitely getting it right now.
Okay, keep going. See if we can continue with that speed and the rigor. Notice if any sensations change in your hands or feet, or if you have a temperature shift. Notice any sensations in the head, if anything's changing there.
Things are getting a little tingly in my extremities.
Mm-hmm.
Like little pops of coolness in my hands.
Okay. Now let's go to the fastest you can with that fullness.
Made me burp. Usually when I burp like that, it's because things are kind of releasing. It's like a tension release. Like sometimes when I'm getting massaged, I burp. So it's like, I don't know, I find it
interesting,
therapeutic.
Okay.
Yeah, now
Now we're going to do that full breath.
My hands are fidgeting a little bit now, actually.
Okay,
So
a little jumpy.
Go even faster now?
Yes, same fullness and faster, like you're running up a hill. Now, as your viewers can see, and I want you to keep going, your CO2 has dropped to 20 millimeters of mercury. You are in the depths of overbreathing. 5 more breaths like that, and then I'm going to have you sit, and we're going to allow your breath to recover on its own. No interventions. And you can see in the pink capnia index that Ron's oxygenation to his prefrontal cortex is right now about 60% less than it should be. Okay, and sit.
Should I hold or exhale?
Exhale.
It feels so good, though. I'm totally face monkeying right now.
Yes, you are. So have a seat. Come back to us. Take a look at the screen. You can see in your green history that we really lowered your CO2 with deep breaths. And if you go back to what we were talking about earlier, were we increasing or decreasing oxygen delivery?
I'm sorry. Ask the question one more time, please. I'm still in la la land.
Yes, exactly. Your brain is still deficient of oxygen delivery, so you can't actually hear my question. It's a perfect example, right? I dropped your cerebral circulation by 60% in 3 minutes. Right? That is huge for people to understand. And you thought it was great. It felt good. Right?
Yeah.
This is one of those situations that I was speaking to earlier where we have been taught incorrectly, but we believe that when our CO2 drops and we feel less, that's what relaxation is. But it isn't. It's a compressed nervous system. It's compressed. You literally feel less. There's less air in your head, and there's less ability to sense internally and externally in your world. And the tingling that you felt was that reduction of circulation and the vasoconstriction of your blood vessels so that it could push the remaining oxygenated blood to where it needs to go. Okay? So now as we're back and you're fiddling in the opposite direction, what happens if you stop doing that?
Stop doing what?
Stop extending your inhales and exhales and let your body choose the volume. Let your body choose it. We're just coming to it with some curiosity of if I don't do it, what is it doing? Yeah. Fantastic. Now, are you experiencing any stress or strain?
I'm experiencing bliss.
You're experiencing bliss. That is called oxygen in your brain.
How novel.
We brought it back. So when I was explaining it earlier, this is what I love for clients to know and for your viewers to understand is that sensation of bliss, of coming back to normal CO2 is actually supposed to be the baseline of humanity. What if you could live your life from this moment? That feeling in your body of clarity in your brain and wholeness in your body. That's the experience we're intended to have.
This very much feels like the type of concentration, meditation, breathing that I would do at the monastery would be, this kind of like more oxygenated form of breathing. Whereas as someone who loves stimulants, my drugs of choice are always uppers that make me feel more frantic and like go, go, go. Mm-hmm. I feel like that's why I often associate that less oxygenated state, maybe that sort of frantic, tingly thing with a kind of a positive mental state. But in reality, when I slow things down and I go to more of the oxygenated, meditative type of breathing, that is actually a much better form of well-being that I can experience.
And it's really important that you were able to point out that you feel hypocapnic symptoms when you're using a stimulant. It's not the stimulant causing hypocapnia. It's your response to it. I've worked with people who I can't drink coffee. Coffee makes me jittery. No, it doesn't. Your response to caffeine, changing your breathing as a response to the alertness of caffeine will make you anxious. So it can be so simple. You're loving those breath holds.
Yeah. I do. They go right to my head, and it feels like feels really good.
Now, you can't breath hold all day and have a real life.
No.
So
unless you're a monk.
Right, and that's not reasonable or lucrative for most of us.
No, I did not take that path. I almost did, but I did not.
Right. So let's take a look at how can we be there without all that effort, including having to live in a monastery. Yeah. What happens if you drop your volume to half? So notice what your full breath is, and not your fullest breath, a comfortably full breath. If you're feeling any tension in your neck or shoulders, you're working too hard. Okay. Now drop to half of that volume. And I would just like for you to confirm you're not breath holding at all in this cycle, right?
I don't think so, but
I don't see it, but I just want, because the viewers know that you were having fun with that. So you're just breathing 50% of a full breath gently, and your CO2 has recovered to 37 millimeters of mercury. How's the head feel?
The whole body feels really good.
Yeah. Now, if you were to make one tiny adjustment, I would have you bring your awareness to the end of your exhale and allow yourself to rest in that pause until you actually feel a sense. It'll either be a push in the throat or a slight movement in the diaphragm to breathe in again. So it's just a rest. Okay, now let go of that. No pause at all. Just trust that the body will breathe in when it needs to. That's great.
This is so fun. I feel like I'm high.
Okay, now drop your breathing rate. Not breathing rate, sorry, breathing volume. I want you to go down to half again, 25% of a full breath. And notice that it's actually really easy. If at any time it starts to feel like, I wish I could have more, go up to a 50% volume for one breath and then come back. And what the viewers are seeing is that your CO2 levels are staying between 35 and 36. So you're still in a safe range where it's not going to be creating any compensations in the body at a 25% volume. Now, it's not at 40 because 25% is actually still too much. Right now, we have a rate volume mismatch in your metabolism by the way we're manipulating your breath. If the volume was correct, your CO2 would be at 40.
40 is the target?
Yeah, that's where I start.
How do we get to 40?
So right now, does a 25% breath feel safe enough that we could keep going with that?
I think so. I think we can keep going.
Now, here's the challenge for you, because you are a blissful breath holder. When I instruct you in a moment to breathe in and then hold that breath in, only for as long as it feels good, for you, that's a long time. That's not for the average person, right?
Why is that? Is it a kind of a, am I mistaken to think that world feels good?
You are not mistaken. You're just more practiced. So
Okay.
for most people, the urge to breathe out is going to come sooner than what we're going to see for you today for a first timer.
Okay.
Okay.
Mhm.
So drop the breath volume to 25%, allow it to be soft and silent. And then when you get to the fullness of 25%, hold it in, but only for as long as it feels good. As soon as you feel any residual tension in your body, even if you still feel good, but you notice tension in a part of the body, it's time to breathe. I'll just give you a minute to get used to that so that you can find more and more relaxation in that pause. And if you come to the edge of a little tension where it feels like, hey, I'm not getting enough, in this situation, we're actually bumping into those chemoreceptors where they're pulling the alarm bell saying, you need to breathe now a little sooner than they need to because they've habituated to a lower level. They're giving you this message to breathe in, as you can see on the screen for your viewers, 5 millimeters before you hit 40. Now, if you were to extend that pause until you really feel the urge to breathe and then still breathe out gently, exactly. And now your CO2 is rising into the normal range. So that tension that you're feeling is the chemoreceptors trying to say, this isn't safe now, we're not usually here, you should go lower. And you are giving it a corrective experience. You're giving your nervous system a corrective experience that every breath that you hold doesn't have to be followed by a big breath or an emergency. And now let that whole practice go and just watch how your breathing reacts. What's the response from that practice? You might notice the volume changes, the rate changes. You might notice the effort of the inhale or exhale changes. And what we can see is that your body has immediately backed up by about 4 millimeters of mercury. So you gave it a new experience, a new edge, and then when it went back to what it's doing for you subconsciously, it brought you back down. And now you're introducing the pauses again and you're coming up.
Pauses on the inhale, yeah?
Yep.
Not on the exhale?
Nope, not today. We could do that, but not today.
What, is that more of an advanced thing?
No, it's a time thing. How much time do you want to spend today? Yeah.
See, what I'm falling into when, as you instruct me, is I'm just falling into like that muscle memory of driving into states of concentration meditatively. And that's where my mind goes. It's like a muscle memory.
Yeah, it is. It is. So let's take a moment now for you to explain from your perspective, what was that whole line of challenges of manipulating the breath like for you? What did you notice? What did you like? What didn't you like?
I would say that I have a tendency to like the bigger, longer pauses, and I had to fight that urge and allow the breath to be more continuous, even though my tendency would be more to allow for longer pauses until my system sort of went too far with that, and then I would maybe spring back the other way. So I was having a hard time maintaining that balance of not doing more pausing. But now that I think about it, weren't you trying to get me to pause and I wasn't?
At one point, yes.
But yeah, all in all, it was really nice to just be mindful of my breathing and to slow things down. And I don't know if the markers indicated it, but it felt really good. Maybe I don't know if that had to do necessarily with oxygen and CO2, but maybe it was just like I'm taking my monkey mind off of thinking and sort of frazzle dazzle normal activity and just onto a focused state of breathing. But it felt really nice. And yeah, what did you see?
So let's visit this together. Up in the toolbar where you clicked on connect, there is a pause button. And I'll have you click on the pause button.
This button?
Yes. And then we can actually go over, let's bring in and look at your entire session. We worked for half an hour. There, perfect.
There it is. So this is the heavy breathing, that's for sure.
That's right. That's when you started.
Which I liked because I'm a junkie.
Right. You like extreme sports, and that's one of them.
Yeah.
So that's an extreme sport of breathing. But just for clarification, the first time I ever put a Capno trainer on, that's where I was normally. And I didn't know that my breathing was so dysfunctional that the reason why I was on disability was because I wasn't getting enough oxygen to my brain to finish the healing from the brain injury because I got stuck in overbreathing. Right. So when we're in those lower levels, if you interpret it like you did as really good, then what would stop you from being there all day?
Yeah, no, for sure. And
it was a compression.
Coffee a day.
Right. So the compression of the nervous system and deep breaths have accidentally been taught as what we need to do to relax, but it's teaching people how to dissociate. And that's a really important breathing pattern that needs to be understood and unlearned.
What is dissociative about that state?
What's dissociative there is you access different parts of yourself because you have access to less. You're losing access to parts of yourself. So you can't be in the present moment.
It's being comfortably numb, so to speak.
Exactly. It's the same as drinking a few shots of whiskey. It's just going to give you a lower sense of your present moment. Now, if that's what you want, it works, but that's not good for the rest of your physiology. And it's not good for being able to do anything at a high level of functioning. Right. Now, what we can see there is when we started, your CO2 levels were around 30 to 32. So you were mildly hypocapnic when we started. As we continued and you started to goof around and play, you were able to jam your CO2 up at one point all the way up to 45 to 47.
Is that getting into unhealthy territory?
Well, if it was there all the time, yes. But that's where the chemoreceptors should be telling you, hey, that's too much. You should breathe now.
Now, what a monk that's in jhana, do you think they're between 45 and 50 for like an hour straight? If that's
no, they're more like 52, 53. We get up into the 50s in that practice.
That's totally saturated.
It's saturation, but it's also CO2 saturation. So you get
CO2 sat.
So what does CO2 do? It helps perfuse oxygen. So then you do end up in a place where your oxygen saturation, if you were wearing a Pulsat, would start to drop because it gets to the place where there's no oxygen left in the blood. It completely uses it up, and then you have to take a breath, and then it goes back up.
Now, why am I yawning now and almost feeling like I just did a sprint? Is that from this stuff, or is that from the more oxygenated stuff?
I will explain that to you when we get to the end of this, because that's another little thing that's great. So what we can see is we changed your breathing rate, your breathing volume, right? And what was interesting is every time I asked you to do something to your inhale, your exhales became forceful. Any breath hold, your exhales became forceful. So that's a habit that you and I would look at is, wow, anytime your body takes a little bit more air, you're pushing it out instead of allowing it out. And that is going to lower your CO2 over time, which is exactly how we got you down into the range of 20 millimeters of mercury.
By forcing it out.
By forcing it out. Right. Now, if you were actually running up a hill, that would have been working for you, but not at rest. Not at rest. Mm-hmm. And it's the present moment, what your metabolism needs right now, that matters in breath work. And anything that we do in terms of breathing techniques is disrupting our pH. So unless our goal in disrupting our pH is to learn how to recognize when we're out of order notice the suffering, and return to normal, that technique is not working for our better good.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So like Wim Hof breathing is good for raising awareness, but it's not good as like a default state.
Right. I like to say Wim Hof teaches I can do hard things and suffering isn't all that bad.
Yeah.
and Buteyko breathing says, life could be easier. Life could be a little easier. You don't have to think about it so much. It tries to get you to stop overthinking. So
there's like a time and place for each.
There's a time and place. And when we think about back to your own journey in history, why do so many yogis and meditation teachers have thousands and thousands of breathing techniques recorded in the history? Why?
To meet different students where they're at and to snap them out of wherever they're coming from.
Right. To bring them to normal respiration. Breathing techniques are supposed to be a learning tool to recover reflexive respiration. We've been looking at it the wrong way. And they've become toys for exploration rather than, can we find our baseline? And that's why for most, you had to sit and do nothing for a long time before they would teach you anything, because you needed to know your own breath. And then you manipulate the breath. So I like to go back to that and then come forward to see what you really did. And when you came back up, you immediately started breath holding. And I know that is a reflex for you from behavior. It's a habit for you. But you didn't return to normal breathing on your own. When you stopped doing that, you can see at 21 minutes and 36, you came right back down to your previous baseline of around 32.
Would you say that's my baseline, 32?
Yes. Yeah. And then when we started working on focusing on less breath, we were able to bring it up again. Interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then when you talked, it would come back down. And then we focused a bit more, practicing with extending the holds. We actually got up to 40. And we got up to 40, not because breath holds are good, but because that breath hold was the length of time required for your body to absorb the oxygen that it had. So it means 25% was still too big of a breath. 25% was too big of a breath for you in that moment. And we had to breath hold to get the oxygen out of the bloodstream and into the tissue. A normal, healthy breath does not require breath holds, ever. But breath holds are a stepping stone to recovery.
Right. So a normal, healthy breath is like very much a continuous kind of wave. It's just a very small bandwidth wave.
It's continuous. It's between 37 and 40 millimeters of mercury. It has access to whatever mechanics are required in the moment. And the volume can fluctuate without changing the end tidal CO2. Yeah. Now, if we were to go back to the pause button and hit play. Oh, wait, one more thing. Sorry. If we look back to when I had you doing the mental math and the memory.
Yeah.
Your CO2 was the best. Look at just before 12 minutes, 12:57. Yeah.
This?
Yes, that section. That was think about your day in reverse and do some mental math. You completely let go of your breathing. Your breathing rate went way up. Your breathing volume went way down. And you accessed your prefrontal cortex to do the things I asked you to do.
That's really cool.
Right? And as soon as you weren't doing that anymore, you started over breathing. And so this is classic for a habit. Some people are chronically hypocapnic where they're there all the time. Some people are only hypocapnic during certain activities. For you, you're hypocapnic moderately at rest, but when you have to do a meaningful task that requires your prefrontal cortex, you disengage the overbreathing and you went right to normal breathing without me saying anything.
Maybe that's why I like to do mental stuff.
Right. Because what? You feel better.
Right.
So is it really that mental stuff makes you feel better, or is it that's the only time of the day you're getting enough oxygen? So you've paired those now as when I do mental stuff, I feel good. I feel more myself than any other time. Is that true? Yes, because you can't feel all of yourself all the rest of the time.
Wow. This is really an amazing technology to be able to monitor this stuff.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Is there anything else that's like this in the world? I mean, is this the only thing that really follows breathing at this level of?
Yeah, there's a lot of other breathing apps out there that are going to tell you your oxygen saturation or your rate of breathing. Some of them even have volume, but we're using a strain gauge. But if they can't tell you what your CO2 is, then we don't know if you're using those things appropriately. So you can't see behavior, the effects of breathing habits, if you're not using capnometry.
Right.
And that's why I'm doing this full time now, because if I can help people come back to their breath, and then we close this, so you don't need this tech forever, but now they have a felt sense of what an open, healthy breath is, then they have full access to their physiology again, and they have full control of their life. You might still make bad choices, but that's not about your oxygen.
Yeah.
Usually.
Yeah.
Right.
So how many months of training does a person really require before they can habituate above 35?
For most people that I work with, I see them once a week for 15 to 20 weeks, and then we're done.
Wow. And then that's
so 3 or 4 months. 3 or 4 months and you're done. And then you might have a new trauma happen. You might have something come up where you have to have a surgery, or you have a very painful emotional experience, and you might notice that you get trapped in low CO2. So you might need some counseling or some somatic breath therapy, which is the other part of what I do, where we work on healing the emotional aspect so that we can let the breath come back up into the safe zone. But those are episodes. Then you have access to normal breathing, and we just bring you back. And that's it. So those are one-offs afterwards. Those are not, you don't need a perpetual training. Like surgery.
Yeah.
You have a healing zone right after surgery.
Right.
And with the breathing, after that 3 to 4 months, you give it another 90 days when you've completed, so that the body can catch up. Whatever healing it couldn't do because you were hypocapnic, it can now do. So some people complain, well, I finally got my breathing right, and I'm so tired, or my old injury sites are hurting more. Well, yes, they are, because now they're healing, and now you can feel them.
Yeah. Can you tell me why I'm feeling so sort of lethargic right now, and almost like I need to take a nap?
Yes. Press play where we pressed pause before. And let's take a look. Okay. So since we froze the screen, and if we look down at the pink zone, what we can see is that your CO2 levels slowly started to come back down into what is your baseline. And if you're hypocapnic, it shows here from 30 to 32. And over the last several minutes, you even were as low as 25.
Wow.
So your prefrontal cortex lost 30 to 40% of its oxygen. And your body created fatigue, started with a yawn, which is a defense mechanism to tell you, we can't handle the stimulation that you are currently getting. Please back off, because your CO2 dropped. Damn.
I'm more messed up than I realized.
We all are. So the beauty of it is it's so easy to turn around. And a yawn is a reflex. That's our friend, right? A yawn is our friend. Fatigue is our friend. Apnea is our friend. If you have those kinds of problems, it's because your body's trying to solve a problem. It's the solution to get you to do less while it fixes something. And for apnea specifically, in sleep issues and airway issues, that's when the body is rebuilding the CO2 so that you breathe.
Andrew Huberman, how he talks all about these NSDR naps that he does like midday to recover his brain. It's basically like, instead of falling asleep, it's kind of a breath-based body scan based meditation session that he does. And then he says, 15 minutes later, he feels like $1 million. Do you think what that's really about is just getting control back of the breath and getting the chemistry right in the body? Because that type of meditation leads to a reduction in breathing.
Right. We would have to measure him with a capnometer. He has access. It would be cool if he did that.
Yeah, you should get on his thing.
Yeah, I would like him to do it with that. And I would like him to do it for his physiological size. I would like him to show us what's really happening. Are we getting good CO2 or are we tanking it, but we think we feel better? Are we dissociating and we wake up and go, okay, I can finally cope with what's left of the day?
Yeah, well, you should talk to Dr. Rama. I mean, he's at Stanford, Huberman's at Stanford. Why don't you set that up?
That is an excellent idea. Wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah, but I get him first. I get first dibs on Huberman.
Okay, he can come on your show to show the results.
No. No, he's all yours. You've earned it for sure. You've put in a lot more work than I have. So, but seriously, Dr. Rama could maybe set that up. I think Huberman would be all over this sort of thing. Huberman, can you hear us?
They did have capnography as one of their intake measures on their physiologic psi report, on their research there, but they didn't include it in their findings. So it must have been an inconvenience or an inconvenient truth, or they couldn't figure out why it wasn't collaborating with what they thought were positive outcomes. I'm not sure. I'd have to ask him why they didn't include it.
Yeah, well, it's certainly a frustrating thing to have to confront if you think you're a paragon of health and then you jump on one of these things and you realize you're a hot mess.
Well, you're not always hypocapnic, so you're not a hot mess, just sometimes.
Uh-huh. Well, a hot mess by default, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
In my case.
And why for you specifically is probably because of the overtraining of the extremes. That you've learned to feel better in the extremes. And that brings me back to a point about airway reduction or small airways being open. And we talked about that blue ocean feeling earlier. If you felt resistance in a small airway and you have the surgeries, and then you start to breathe, but subconsciously, you're not getting a good breath unless you can feel the resistance. You're going to go into even deeper overbreathing so that you can come to the feeling that you believe is what you have to feel to get a good breath.
That's like a empty nose syndrome, classic situation where people end up in really negative mental states, even suicidal because they can't feel the air coming in. Right. And why are they suicidal? Because their CO2 is at 10 or 15 millimeters of mercury, and their brain is saying, we're almost dead, we're almost dead, we're almost dead. We may as well be dead, we don't have enough. That's the self-talk. It's a negativity bias designed to help us find the problem, but we project it in the wrong way. Yeah, like Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson projected that into a propofol addiction, like the ultimate seeking of numbness. Yeah. Imagine if children were taught this and we had baseline screening with capnometry at a young age, how that would shift people's ability to stay healthy. And if we had breathing training, like what we were talking about into the extremes, would then be done in the appropriate way because people would know what normal feels like. That's sort of one of my goals long term. That's amazing. As you talk, I'm trying to coach myself into a low volume of breathing with natural pauses after the inhale, after the exhale, but just instead of breathing like, now I'm kind of breathing like much smaller wavelength, whatever the shorter, the smaller amount of air coming in and out, but more consistently. Right. Is that like what the ideal curve looks like? in terms of breath volume
Well, it's,
for the resting state?
let's see if you do it. Do it.
Okay.
Let's see if that's right for you.
My nose is actually starting to run a little bit.
You've had tubes up it for a while now, so I'm sorry.
Hey, better tubes than putting anything else up there.
Yeah.
My words, not yours. See, my first instinct is like big breath, right?
And that's the first step. Can we grow the awareness about how we have been manipulating the breath? And so today you've had a big opening in that, some new awarenesses, right? And in our sessions, if we were working one-on-one, then it's really, a lot of it is very client-led. I did some very directed things with you today so we could get to the point. But it's you finding those edges, you understanding the sensations that creates the rapid reset.
This is so fun. People just listening who aren't seeing this graph are probably like, what are they doing?
Mm-hmm. I'll tell you, oh, there we go. Yeah. This is what Ron looks like mucking with his breath. So some of the other ways that you could work with your breathing here, and that I do with clients, is that we have other pages in the software where we can do rate testing, volume testing, HRV, EMG. We can do a time analysis. We can see what's happening with your parasympathetic tone while you're breathing.
Why do you think that the human animal is so delicate when it comes to having healthy breathing patterns? Like, don't you think nature should have been a little bit more clever in designing us, or the creator in designing us to be a little bit more durable in like not falling into these patterns of bad breathing?
But then we would just be monkeys.
Do you think that animals, non-human animals, also fall into bad breathing patterns? Or do you think that they don't, because it's always the result of like essentially the rational mind and the emotional mind imposing itself that leads to these bad patterns?
In mammals that are not domesticated, the breathing is autonomic. And when it becomes disordered, it's because of trauma. Either they just ran from a predator, or they got hit by a car, or they've been shot, or they're being eaten, which in that case, breathing ceases, which is pointless. But my point being, domesticated animals mimic the humans they're around, and you can see cats and dogs with anxiety disorders with breathing that is out of this world crazy. Why wasn't it smarter? I think we have to reframe that. It's because we were able to adapt our breathing to certain situations that we've survived. Even now, we have a young generation that's adapting its breathing to survive. Because anyone who is scrolling their phone for hours and hours a day is hypocapnic, because the dopamine hits that they get and the overbreathing that ensues when they put the phone down is astronomical.
Wow.
And then they pick it back up to feel at ease, and then they put it down.
Amazing.
And they're overbreathing.
Now, what's the relationship between diet and breathing? Because I think people with bad airways and bad breathing generally feel better when they eat cleaner. And I think that what that means varies somewhat from person to person. You know, some people eat only meat and eat great. Some feel great. Some people eat meat and vegetables and feel great. And I don't know about the plant-based stuff, but presumably some people feel great with that too. But I don't think anyone feels great like pounding tons of sugar and junk and cake all day. So what's the relationship of clean eating and feeling good?
That's a great question. Our gut health is determined by our metabolic stability. And what's in charge of our metabolism? Our breathing. So if your CO2 is low, and I mentioned earlier, you get that low level anxiety that starts moving through the body to alert you. The next thing that happens as it starts to choose where the oxygen's going. So you drop from the prefrontal cortex, but it also starts to shut down the gut and the gut lining. So you can't digest food as the way that you would before. You're actually getting less nutrients. And it's harder to digest certain kinds of food because there isn't enough oxygen there to create and sustain the microbiome and the digestive enzymes that you need. So for hypocapnic, we almost certainly will be creating imbalances in the gut and in digestion. I've worked with people who've had Crohn's and IBS diagnosis for their whole life. And 6 months later, they went in for a scope and they couldn't find anything. There was no inflammation left because the gut healed as she came back from the 20 millimeters of mercury CO2 she'd been at for 30 years. Right?
Wow.
So our bodies are designed to heal if they have the resources that are required. So if we think that those resources aren't being met and we just start taking a pile of supplements and we're hypocapnic, those supplements aren't getting absorbed the way that the person who designed them thinks they will. The medical community and the supplement industries assume that we have normal CO2 when they create dosages. If we don't, it's going to take double or triple to get the same results. And nobody's going to say, yeah, go ahead, take 3 times more of that vitamin, because the rest of it's just going to go out of your body because you can't absorb it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really critical to work with breath first. And then whatever's left is what you start putting the supplementation towards. And it can help with healing deficits when you've corrected breath as well. So allergies can go away, inflammations can go away. And again, why do these diets work? This is my general theory. We can talk about that in more specifics. But the general theory is as soon as you remove items from your diet, the stomach lining can adjust to what you're giving it. And then you have narrowed the parameters of its duties, thus alleviating the extra work it was trying to do. So you feel better because now you're within the parameters your body can handle if you're hypocapnic.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. When someone takes on this sort of training with you,
Mm-hmm.
is there a while where, like during that 3-month period, they're having interactions in their life, like talking to someone, but they're sort of secretly paying attention to their breath the whole time instead?
Yes.
And do you find that causes people to be more socially anxious and self-conscious, or do you find that because they're actually getting a hold of their levels and making them healthier, that they actually find themselves more relaxed and calm in social situations, even though a chunk of their bandwidth is being applied just to monitoring their breathing?
Right. It's that learning curve. And I encourage everyone that if you're changing your breathing, and for example, in a social situation, let people know what you're doing and make it a game. It just lightens your load. So if you say, hey, if you see me holding my breath, or if I'm like breathing through my mouth, could you just like tap your nose so I remember to go back to nasal breathing? And you'd be a really good friend to me if you would do that. Right. Mm. And make it light. But yes, we end up overthinking it for a while, but not for too long. Mm-hmm. Because we feel better. And when your breath is in the normal zone, there's no reason to think about it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what about something like you mentioned earlier? Did you mention earlier, or am I making this up? How like a sexual experience could change someone's breathing, and you something about performance anxiety and its relationship to breathing. So like men, for example, who have a performance anxiety, perhaps early in their sort of sexual life, where they're in a situation, they're nervous, maybe it's one of their first sexual encounters, and they kind of just shut down completely. Mm-hmm. Is that a matter of the breath being hijacked and shutting down their bodies to the point where like maybe they can't get an erection or something like that?
Yes, that's a big piece of it.
Mm-hmm. And so, or like another situation, even if like this happened to me once, I was at a concert and there was a long line to use the bathroom, and finally, I had to go to the bathroom so bad. Number one, right? And I finally got up, and these were like exposed stalls, so everyone in line could see you. And I got up, and all of a sudden, like, I felt the weight of all these people watching me, and I shut down and I couldn't go. Like, my body just tightened up and I couldn't go. And I was like, what the, come on, this is going to suck. Like, I have to go. Otherwise I'm going to be miserable, but I couldn't. And I tried doing different breathing things in the moment, but then after like 60 seconds, the guys behind me were like, dude, what are you doing? Come on. Oh man, he's choking.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It was horrible. It was horrible. This was like when I was like 18, but
which will just make it worse. So the vasoconstriction was actually not allowing the urethra to open.
Yeah, and that was a matter of the mind, the breathing.
It's a combo. They're always connected.
Same thing with like erectile dysfunction, performance anxiety issues.
Yes, their hormones play a part, but it's also how do we respond to the hormones? A really big piece of that for female viewers would be to understand that progesterone actually makes you breathe faster. So every single month, the week before a woman has her period, when the progesterone starts going up to prepare the uterus to bleed, she's going to breathe faster. And progesterone's a vasodilator and increases respiratory drive. So you don't need to have big breaths because it vasodilated you. It made your bronchioles bigger. So you don't have to take big breaths. It's already, you got more space. But if you're afraid of fast breathing, you're going to take it over. Then you're going to be in low CO2. Then your uterus isn't getting the oxygen that it needs to bleed properly, which is every single symptom of PMS. PMS begins and ends with low CO2. And why is it their breathing goes totally back to normal when they're done bleeding? Well, their hormone levels are back up to their normal phase. So during the luteal phase, we breathe faster. And if a woman has learned that breathing fast is dangerous, she'll have extreme PMS symptoms. Same thing during pregnancy. It's actually in obstetric books that every pregnant woman is hypocapnic.
That can't be good for the baby in the belly.
Right. That's where pregnancy symptoms come in and out. And in extreme cases, hyperemesis. And in third trimester, you're getting a lot of really big issues with moms, with edema and such, and placental issues and liver issues, because the body can't compensate. So if we teach women in their youth how to allow the breathing, it changes their life cycle and their reproductive life cycle if they choose to have children.
My gosh, that seems like a really big deal.
It is. It's a huge deal.
My wife is pregnant right now. I should have had her on for the call.
Hey, well, I know she'll be on right after.
Oh, man. No, I think that I wonder how much of people developing these breathing disorders is a function of the fact that their mother had it when they were in the womb. And that's just like the blood condition that they're used to, is that ratio of O2 and CO2. And that just becomes normal for them.
It's a little more delicate because we're not actually breathing in the womb, right? We're receiving it through the umbilical cord. So we don't really have breathing behaviors in the womb. But we do have sensitivities to what we are receiving. So you're right there. There'll be some learning. If a mother is hypocapnic, then the baby is developing in low CO2. And babies that are developed, that gestate in low CO2, research shows have bigger amygdalas, which means a bigger fear center. And Dr. Joseph Chamberlain says, he's part of the American Pre- and Perinatal Psychological Society, says during that delicate time of gestation, the brain is saying, am I safe now, or can I go for creativity? And so the extra building in the brain, it goes to the amygdala or the prefrontal cortex. And children that are born to mothers with a lot of anxiety or low CO2 for a variety of reasons have bigger amygdalas. So,
yeah, that's interesting. Certainly, I only feel comfortable enough to be creative when I feel good.
Right.
Although a lot of artists come from places of tremendous suffering. So, but
Mhm.
but then again, a lot of artists use drugs that make them feel a certain way at the moment that they actually create the art. So they're somehow having to dissociate from the negative, even if it's in an unhealthy way that actually spirals them deeper into a state of negativity. Like, F. Scott Fitzgerald being an alcoholic, or, you name it, any number of artists in their drug of choice. So maybe they're not, in their amazing art, are not coming from a place of like perfect O2 CO2 health.
Right. What does alcohol do? Vasodilates. So you get better oxygen delivery for a while. Long term, it's terrible for you. Right. It changes your inhibition level because you're over breathing with vasodilation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Other drugs. This one's really fun. I'm glad you brought up artists. I had an artist come into my office who assured me that all they needed was cannabis, that their breathing was fine, and that when they use cannabis daily as a daily practice, that they could live their life perfectly. So I asked them when they came in, did you have cannabis today? And they said, well, no, because I thought you'd want to see me without cannabis. I said, okay, great. Let's look at your CO2. So the CO2 was really low. So I invited her to come back. And I said, next time you come in, you're going to smoke cannabis in front of me. And we're going to watch what happens. And her CO2 came up to perfection. Now, is it the cannabis? No, the cannabis is not what happened. The cannabis was the trigger for her to allow her breathing. The sensations of cannabinoids in her brain and in her body disengaged her overbreathing habits. And I said, okay, so it's a habit. We recognize that, and her mind was blown. And so what if you could feel like this without having to have cannabis in your system every day? And that was the beginning of our journey of working through, so now she uses cannabis recreationally. It's no longer what she has to have to be able to function.
No, I love cannabis too. I mean, to the point where it's like the number one thing I have to manage in terms of addictive habits. I've done videos on that before. But yeah, when you mention it, it's like, what do I really like about cannabis? I like how it makes me feel in my body. It almost feels like when I'm meditating, and that bliss permeates throughout my body. And I'm wondering how much of that is just because when you think about what you're actually doing when you smoke, when you smoke or vape, that is a breathing process in and of itself. So there's a deliberateness to that. And then it just sort of, and then you're like,
yeah, and you breath hold, which means better oxygen perfusion.
You almost do that so that you get more, like in your mind, you're like, oh, I'm going to like ghost hit it so that it gets more delivered to my brain so I can get higher. And so, yeah, it's so interesting to think about how interconnected these things are.
Yeah, I've done that with everyone. Yeah.
What do you mean you've done that with everyone?
I have people come in craving a cigarette. Let's look at your CO2. Okay, light up. And it's not even at their mouth yet, and their CO2 comes to normal. They're so habituated to breathe normally once they know they're about to get nicotine, which means it's not the nicotine. It's the knowing that they're getting the nicotine, their CO2 came up and they disengaged the breathing habit. Same thing with vapes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it goes the other way too for cannabis, is that people who don't like cannabis, they say it makes them feel anxious. It's because that sensation that comes with cannabis, if that's not a safe sensation for them, they're going to be over breathing. And then they get this weird feeling in their head because they're getting prefrontal cortex drainage, and they get super anxious because they're over breathing with cannabis in their system, and it makes it worse and worse. So recognizing that when we introduce these things, the level of oxygenation in our system as a result of our breathing habits is how we will experience them. Yeah. We sure went in a lot of places today. That was great.
Well, I feel like this is tying so much together for me in terms of experiences I've had in my life and why they made me feel the way they did. It's like all of it just had to do with how I was breathing at the time.
It might have been.
And of course, it's like breathing is something you're literally doing every moment of your entire life.
That's
Oxygen
right.
is the ultimate metabolic substrate. It's like without oxygen, there's no oxidation of the metabolites and so on and so forth.
That's right.
Damn. Mind blown.
I promised you.
So if you could give a elevator pitch, like breathing instructional take home message for a viewer of this episode who's still watching after 2.5 hours, what would you say is, in a sentence or two, the way to breathe correctly as opposed to what they're presently doing?
The way to have an open, healthy breath, because there is no one right way to breathe. An open, healthy breath responds to the reflexes in the body. We do not have to do the breathing. We can actually be comfortable enough to allow it to adjust as it needs to. In that way, we know that we have access to all of our mechanics. We have access to a good chemical access, which is the pH from the breathing. And that our psychology, the things that we need, our wants, desires, and emotions, we can have access to all of those without linking them to a breath. And by doing that, it means that we can actually have a really fun life, like an active life, like an exploratory life, a curious life, because nothing's going to slow us down because we're going to have all the energy we're supposed to have. If you want to learn how to do it for yourself, the first thing is awareness. How are you breathing? And any breathing technique that you try is going to tell you more about how you are breathing than the technique itself. You want to watch, how do you push back on that technique? Or like we did earlier, slow your breath down, not because it's good breathing, but because it gives you a chance to find those habits, those things that make you want to change the breathing. And that's where you start. Where are my habits? And how can I take those habits and change them so that they allow the breath in that situation, whatever the trigger is, so that you have a different response with your breathing to the triggers. That's the first step.
Amazing. And if people want to work with you one-on-one and get themselves one of these CAPNO trainers, what's that process look like?
I am so easy to find at sleepandbrain.com, and Dr. Rama has invested in a lot of CAPNO trainers, so you don't have to buy one, you can rent one. And it's a lot easier on the pocketbook because we're only going to work together for a few months. So if you want to do that, get an assessment with me through sleepandbrain.com. And if you want to buy one, then you can contact me about that or Dr. Rama.
Fantastic. Any other socials or anything that you'd like to share, LV?
Sleep and Brain doesn't have a lot of active socials. I do have a social, Conspire Health, and I'm on Instagram and on Facebook. And I have a website, conspirehealth.ca. But primarily I'm at sleepandbrain.com. We are really revving it up.
And just to be clear, that's Dr. Anil Rama's website, and anyone watching this project should know exactly who that is. I've done a couple of interviews with him. He's an amazing sleep medicine doctor and a good friend of mine. So it's good to know that you are part of his team.
And in this realm with sleep, this work is such an amazing, not just complement, but foundational piece to recovery.
Amazing. LV, thank you so much. This was very eye-opening.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Bye-bye.